When my husband and I got married, we promised to be faithful to each other. But, but we did carve out an exception clause to our marriage vows that went like this. In the unlikely but not impossible case of Stevie Nicks coming for my husband or George Harrison coming for me, we would let each other go. Because my husband knew that at the age of 10, I had a cataclysmic experience. When I first heard my first Beatles record, I could not believe what I was hearing. I could not believe what I was feeling, nor could I understand what I was feeling, but I can tell you now that craving was at the top of the list. Now, back in the days of Beatlemania, it was customary to pick your favorite Beatle. Most girls, and probably quite a few guys, picked Paul. And rightfully so, because not only was he gorgeous, but he really wanted you to like him back. And that was a combo many of us knew we weren't going to run into a lot of times in our futures. But for me, the first time I saw the Beatles, I knew that the purpose of my life was to become Mrs. George Harrison. Now, at the age of 10, I knew nothing about sex. Actually, I knew less than nothing because my sister had given me bad information. She said that sex involved a man and a woman in a bed, and while that's not very inclusive, so far she's at least warm. But then she said that the people actually don't touch and lie several feet across, and then at some point the requisite bodily fluid kind of arcs across the bed. Not unlike an NBA three-pointer. But even with that very poor grounding in sexual theory, I could sense that George being 21 and me being 10 was a problem. So I devised a plan, and that was to just get in the vicinity of George. He would see me, he'd come over, ask my name and where I lived. And then he'd say, "Well, Annie, I'm not sure where Mankato, Minnesota is, but when you turn 18, I will come for you and we will get married." And I was 100% confident in that plan. But my optimism did not last. And at age 14, I was completely convinced that I was hideously ugly, and I had already lost George to a woman named Patty Boyd. Now, Patty Boyd, by all objective measurements, was a beautiful woman. I mean, two amazing musicians each wrote a love song for her. But in my 14-year-old mind, I thought Patty had the face of a rabbit. For example, she had little watery blue eyes, very large front teeth, and you can Google that part, and a little rabbity nose that would twitch when she said things to George like, "Don't worry, honey, Eric and I are just friends." I still craved George, but I had lost him and I had to move on. So I stumbled and fumbled into and out of my 20s, but in my 30s, the winds changed, and I met a man. And within a short time, I knew, and this time without being delusional, that he and I could build a happy and stable life. And so we have. But even as a married woman, I kept track of George, and I couldn't help but notice that we were living parallel lives. The same year that I married my husband, Paul, he married his forever wife, Olivia. And not too long after that, all four of us succumbed to the universe's oldest and strongest craving, the urge to procreate. But eventually I realized that my craving for George had become instead a respect for a man who did not let fame and fortune dictate his life. Now, George died in 2001, but Stevie Nicks is still around, so technically that hatchet is still circling above my head. But in thinking about craving, I've also realized how very lucky I am. Yeah, because with another roll of the cosmic dice, I might have been the one born beautiful, big-toothed, and blonde in Britain, and I would have been the model George fell in love with and asked to marry. And if that had been the case, I would have said, yes, George, I will marry you. But if a man from Minnesota named Paul W. comes for me, you will have to let me go. Because what I've realized about craving, for me, what I've learned is the best place to be, the sweetest spot of all, is when you're lucky enough to crave what you already have. Thank you.